Failing PUs, a Ferrari blunder, and a new Verstappen. This week we were chatting all about the Miami Grand Prix, so get ready because you've been summoned to the steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the steward's office. I'm Saira and this week Formula One headed out to Florida for the Miami GP and the first of 3 races in the United States. This was also a sprint weekend, which means that we have a lot more on-track action to go through than usual. And it was also a very interesting weekend. There was a lot going on, a lot that I need to discuss with you guys, a lot we have to chat about. So let's dive into what went on. Big piece of news came out this week though, and that is that Max Verstappen and his partner Kelly Piquet have had a little baby girl called Lily. Max ended up missing media day on the Thursday of the Miami GP to fly back and be with his partner, and yeah, a healthy, happy baby girl, so congratulations to the two of them. That was the biggest piece of news I think before the race weekend started. Let's dive into all of that on track drama though, because like I said, there's a fair bit to go through and a fair bit I want to talk to you guys about. Kicking off with sprint quali, because we only had one practice session. Huge problems for Yuki Tsunoda, Ollie Behrman and Jack Doohan in SQ1. Between the three of them, they couldn't make it across the line in time to get their last fast laps in, and it meant that they all were booted out after SQ1. Now, I'm not entirely sure what happened with Ollie. Yuki had complained and said that there were people in his way when he was coming onto track that sort of impeded him, as well as then having a lockup towards the end of that lap anyway, so none of that helped him out. Jack Doohan though, if you heard his post-quali radio and then his post-quali interview, was not happy with the team. He said that Pierre Gasly was basically in his way, had blocked him, and it caused him not to get to the line in time, and that happened in the pit lane as well. So he was really not happy with the team and the way things were organised there, and yes, ended up getting eliminated. A fairly stable-ish though sprint quali. The big headline news I think that we had in sprint quali though was really Kimi Antonelli getting pole position. This was his first ever pole position in Formula One. And with it, he becomes the youngest pole sitter that we've had in any format. Huge congratulations to him. If you saw the video on Mercedes social media afterwards of him ringing his mum and talking to his sister afterwards, it's so sweet. But I think what this really goes to show, because bear in mind, this was his debut in Miami. He hasn't been there before, none of the rookies have. So to get pole position there is insane. But what I think this really shows for Kimi is that he's really getting bedded in with the car. He's getting used to it and he's really understanding how he needs to drive that car to extract the most from it. So a really amazing qualifying session from Kimi, and yeah, the entire Mercedes garage was so chuffed with that result. The sprint though was chaotic. We didn't get a whole lot of racing, but we got a whole lot of chaos, and there's a lot to talk about here. So starting off with the fact that it was raining, it was a wet track, and that just threw everything out of the window. Strategies and setups weren't going to be the most straightforward here. Now it kicked off with Charles Leclerc on intermediate tyres and crashing on his reconnaissance lap as he was making his way to the grid. This wasn't even the formation lap. He had a moment, car went into the wall, and yeah, there was no way he was going to be able to drive that in the sprint. And Lewis Hamilton had said in post-race interviews he had almost had the same moment as Charles. He had been right behind him, saw what happened and managed to save his own car. But the question for Ferrari was, why were you sending either of your drivers out on intermediate tyres? They both needed to be on wet tyres because it was a slippery track. So Charles was a DNS for the sprint. That was immediately out of the window. When the race did actually start though, we did have Kimi Antonelli losing the lead into turn 1. And it wasn't just the place he lost. He ended up losing 3 places, dropping down to 4th. And I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but I wasn't necessarily expecting him to hold on to the lead, especially in those kind of conditions. His race start wasn't the quickest when compared to Oscar Piastri, who was in P2. And that's just something that comes with experience, and it's something that he'll learn from now. But dropping down to 4th isn't the worst thing in the world. Carlos Sainz had a spin and locked up quite badly, ended up having to retire from the sprint race. Fernando Alonso, he ended up DNFing as well, had an incident with Liam Lawson and had to retire the car. And there was this period in the sprint, it wasn't completely wet the entire time. We had that transition period where it started to get dry. And during that period is when all the cars started to come into box, and we did have a little bit of an incident inside of the pit lane because Max had come into box first, had gotten fresh tyres on. As he was being let out, Kimi was coming into the pit lane and they ended up having contact, and it damaged Max's front wing quite badly. Now, the accident that could have happened had they really hit each other would have been awful, because you also have personnel in the pit lane waiting for their drivers. You have the mechanics out there. So Kimi did really well to try and dodge that as much as he could. Big question with Red Bull is what is going on with your pits, because they have had issues. I think it was last race where Max was being held up in the box for too long because the lights weren't switching quick enough. Now it's him being let out way too early when you can see that there's another car coming down the pit lane. This wasn't either of the drivers' faults. They couldn't have done anything about it. This is really on the team. They have to be the ones spotting and checking to see if there's a car coming. Red Bull did not do that well enough, and what ended up happening was Max got a 10-second time penalty for an unsafe release and a damaged front wing to boot. But main thing is, at least nobody was injured, because like I said, that could have been quite a bad accident. What else happened during that sprint though? Well, Lewis Hamilton basically took control of his own strategy, and it did pay off for him. He ended up asking his engineer Ricky if he could pit if it was too late to pit as the track was drying up, and his engineer said yes, it's too late. He told his engineer he wanted to pit, got in, they told him we're going to put you on medium tyres. He said nope, I want the softs, got onto the softs and made up a lot of places, because a lot of the drivers in front of him, I think all of the drivers in front of him, hadn't pitted yet. That caused him to end up in P3 in the sprint after starting in P7 or 6, but that was Lewis having to call his own strategy down the radio and making sure that he got the tyres that he wanted, that he knew would work. He ended up in P3, Oscar Piastri in P2, Lando Norris in P1, and Oscar, the timing of the safety car because of the Fernando Alonso crash did kind of make things difficult for him. He was in the lead, they pitted him, came out, safety car came out, we finished on a safety car, and McLaren opted not to pit Lando Norris because it wouldn't have made sense with that safety car going on, and it meant that Lando did win the sprint race. And it's sometimes these things are just luck of the draw. Lando's in the right place at the right time, but was something that really benefited him, and Lewis's strategy call really benefited him as well. So there was a lot going on there, and I can't say there was a lot of racing. We didn't get a lot of wheel-to-wheel racing. It was a lot of chaos. It was having to try and figure out when was the best time to pit for the slick tyres and whether your driver should stay out. Max ended up in P4 but then finished right at the back after all the penalties were applied, but he wasn't the only driver that got a penalty. Charles ended up getting a reprimand post-sprint because he was driving in an unsafe condition after that crash during the reconnaissance lap. The FIA were basically saying he should have just stayed there. Driving in that condition was really unsafe, and he shouldn't have tried to bring it back into the pits, should have just gotten out the car and let the recovery vehicles do the rest. So that was a driving reprimand for him. Like I mentioned, Max with his 10-second time penalty for the unsafe release. Alex Albon got a 5-second time penalty for not staying above the delta time. That knocked him out of the points as well, and the reason that he got knocked out of the points and Max went from like P4 down to the back of the pack is because we finished behind a safety car, so all of the cars were bunched up, and any penalty at that point is really going to cost you. Liam Lawson got a 5-second time penalty for causing that collision with Fernando Alonso, and I think that added another penalty point to his license. And Ollie Behrman ended up getting a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release with Nico Hülkenberg. We didn't get to see that, I don't think, but I've got to assume it was less severe than the unsafe release with Max and Kimi Antonelli, where Max and Kimi actually made contact, which is why Ollie got a lesser penalty. But yeah, penalties galore going on in the sprint, which does tend to happen when we have a wet race. But I think overall it was just a super exhausting sprint race for the drivers. It required a lot of concentration, more so than usual because of the conditions and what was going on around them, and very, very taxing to then turn around and say, okay, yeah, you've had the sprint, here's a few hours off, or you're probably going to go into an engineering debrief and figure out what you want to change because quali's coming up next. And quali was not great for some of the drivers. Starting off with Aston Martin, who had both of their drivers eliminated in Q1. It was a difficult weekend for Aston Martin in general, and we'll get into what happened in the race for them. But, you know, hats off to the engineers who managed to repair Fernando Alonso's car in time to go out into qualifying, but neither of the drivers can make it out of Q1. Ollie Behrman also out in Q1 again after just a lot of unluck in the weekend so far. But the big surprise and shock was Lewis Hamilton exiting in Q. And that is his first Ferrari Q2 exit. He locked up in Q1. They had to put an extra set of tyres on him. He managed to get into Q2. He locked up in what I think was pretty much the same place and ended up qualifying in P12, which is not great. So a rough qualifying for him to go from the highs of being on a podium in the sprint to then not getting into Q3. The flip side though, I mean, Williams had a wonderful qualifying. They qualified in P6 and P7. Ahead of one of the Mercedes and ahead of one of the Ferraris. Nope, both the Ferraris, because it was Charles and Lewis. So an amazing, amazing qualifying for them. That pace was insane. Antonelli had a really good follow-up from his pole position and took P3, out-qualified George Russell there. And on pole position was Max Verstappen. They really dialed in that Red Bull car after the sprint, figured out what they needed to do, and he put in an amazing lap to get pole position. Right, now we get on to the actual Grand Prix, and I'm going to take a nice deep breath before this because we have a lot to discuss, guys. And let me preface this by saying that the race itself wasn't great in terms of racing, much like the sprint, fairly boring, but there was a lot going on that we really, really need to chat about. Before the race, the drivers' parade, can I just say, absolutely genius idea having the drivers drive in their team's Lego car, and they were on display throughout the weekend at the Miami Grand Prix, and they looked so cool. I would have loved to have seen them up close, but they actually got the drivers in them. There were 2-seaters and each team was in a car and they got to drive around track in them, and I have never seen all 20 of the drivers so happy all together. Like, honestly, they looked so happy. You could tell their inner child was screaming with joy. We had some race incidents during that, and yeah, honestly, just looked amazing. Lewis Hamilton, I think, posted a TikTok of his footage that he filmed while he was in that car with Charles Leclerc, and it looked just chaotic, but so cool. That was probably my biggest highlight of this weekend, I can't lie to you. That Lego drivers parade, I would love for us to have that again. But yeah, just if you haven't seen it, go and look it up on YouTube or wherever, TikTok, Instagram. It's definitely worth watching because I really want one now. But let's actually get into when the drivers got into their proper F1 cars and chatting about what happened at the front. Our title fight at the moment really is between Max, Lando and Oscar. So let's chat about the three of them. Let's chat about how they did, and we'll kick off with Max Verstappen, who is P3 in the championship at the moment. And him and Lando Norris ended up having an incident straight away into turn 1. Lando took a bit of avoiding action, I guess, and had to come off of the racetrack and onto a runoff area. Max and Lando did get noted for that incident and nothing happened. It was just a turn 1, lap 1 incident, nothing to be done about it. But the rest of the race for Max was quite difficult. He was having issues with his car again. And this time it was a lot to do with the braking, and I feel like this is a complaint that we've had from him in the past couple of races as well. He really was not happy with the car. The high of quality and getting that pole position, it feels like when it comes to long runs with Red Bull, the car just doesn't seem to be quite right. It's okay when they're doing a lap or two, it's okay when they just need to get that fast lap in, But when you're asking the drivers to do 40, 50, 60 laps in a Grand Prix, there are some issues with that car. And yeah, it was a difficult race for Max, who didn't end up finishing on a podium. He was in P4, which, is still a solid amount of points to take, but not the race that he would have wanted. Lando Norris in P2 in the Constructors, and also P2 in the Miami Grand Prix. And that incident that he had with Max Verstappen right at the start of the race did make him lose about 4 places. But I think with Lando, yes, it was frustrating for him, obviously, but he got his head down and just got on with it. Got on with getting the overtakes done, making his way back up to the front, and it worked. Wasn't a win, but still a podium, still P2. Could he have won the race had that incident not have happened? I think there was definitely a chance, but the fact that he didn't let it get to him and just carried on getting his head down and making his way back up to the front is the main thing for him at the end of the day. Then we have Oscar Piastri, who is leading the Drivers' Championship right now, who won the Miami Grand Prix, and that is his 3rd consecutive win this season. He now has more race wins than Lando Norris, which feels a little insane to say, but it is true. He had a phenomenal race, just didn't really make a mistake, got the overtaking on Max Verstappen when he needed to, kept calm, kept his head down, and just got on with it. And, I had a phenomenal race. And yeah, P1, I don't think he can ask for much more. I know he was disappointed after the sprint because of that safety car that didn't really benefit him, but the points on a Grand Prix race are so much more than the sprint, so I think he's going to be absolutely chuffed with that. And McLaren in general, right, they're leading the Constructors' Championship by a landslide, and it just looks like there's no stopping them because both of their cars have such good pace. Both of their drivers are happy with the car, it seems. We're not getting a lot of complaints out of them. There's always going to be stuff to improve, but compared to the other teams, the drivers are really happy. And I think Oscar Piastri was about 40 seconds, nearly 40 seconds, about 37 ahead of George Russell at one point, which is insane. So I think the drivers and the team should be so happy with that performance, and I think it's going to take a lot to try and stop McLaren and that momentum that they've built up, because right now I've got really no doubt in my mind that McLaren are winning the Constructors and that one of their drivers is going to be winning the Drivers' Championship, because it just seems impossible to try and catch up with them right now. Midfield, I think there are really 2 things that I want to talk about that happened in the midfield before we get into some of the chaos that happened during this race, of which there was a lot. But midfield, Williams have done an incredible job because Alex Albon finished in P5 during that race completely on merit. Williams have worked incredibly hard to get this car up to scratch after what was such a disappointing season in 2024. To finish in P5 was amazing, and yeah, for me, Alex Albon should have been driver of the day. It did go to Oscar Piastri, which I do understand, but I honestly would have given it to Alex Albon. Aston Martin, though, they ended up finishing in last place. Last of the drivers that actually managed to finish the race. Fernando Alonso was in P15, Lance Stroll was in P16. It was a really tough race for them. And this entire weekend, I think, is one that they're really going to want to forget about. But yeah, not the results that they want to be going home with. And very curious. I think I've said this before, guys, but I just want to see how the rest of their season goes, because Adrian Newey's focus is really on the 2026 car, which makes a lot of sense because new regulations are coming in and they've got a brand new engine provider coming to them. But I am curious whether there is going to be that much time and attention put into this season, or whether they're just writing it off right now, because that performance was hard to watch. Let's get into some of the drama and chaos that happened on track, though, and we'll start off with our DNFs before I get into what I really want to talk about here. We ended up having 4 DNFs in this race, and all 4 of them were rookies. Jack Doohan was our first DNF of the race. He had an incident with Liam Lawson where Doohan had hit the back of Lawson, got a puncture, tried to make it back to the pits, couldn't, stopped on the side of the track, retired, and that caused our first VSC of the race to come out. Ollie Behrman ended up stopping on track on lap 28, causing our second VSC because his PU had failed. Lap 33, we had another VSC because of Gabriel Bortoleto and his engine failing. He had been told to try and make it back into the pits, but I just don't think he can make it happen. So that was, our third VSC. Liam Lawson drove into the pits to retire because of the damage that he had after his incident with Jack Doohan. So 4 rookies were one of our DNFs. And considering we only have 6 on the grid, I don't know how I feel about that, but that was also 2 Ferrari-powered engines failing and causing those rookies, 2 of them, to DNF. So that'll be very interesting because, we're only 6 races now into the season, so to have that PU failure that early on is a little bit concerning because you're going to start getting through your power units at this point. I've got to say, for Ollie Behrman, this was probably a weekend to forget for him. This entire weekend was fairly bad luck. And Jack Doohan's DNF meant that this has been his 2nd race this season where he has retired on the first lap. So a tough weekend for 4 of our rookies, let's be honest. What I really wanted to talk about though, and what I think a lot of people are talking about and probably will be talking about going into the next race weekend, and that is Ferrari. Now, both of their drivers were on different strategies. Charles was further up the grid, starting on medium tyres. Lewis obviously further down, starting on the hard tyres. Fine, you split strategy, and it does tend to make sense, right? Especially when you have drivers starting in very different places. That did mean, though, that when the first round of pit stops happened, Charles went on to the hard tyres, Lewis went on to the medium tyres, the faster medium tyres. Lewis ended up behind Charles at one point in the race. It would have made a lot of sense for Lewis to be able to get past Charles, see if he could chase down Kimi Antonelli. Lewis had asked about it on the radio, and Riccardo Adami, who is his race engineer, was like, look, we will check and have a think about it. The usual line when it comes to Ferrari, doing anything that comes off script when it comes to their strategies. Lewis asked again, he was burning up his tyres, and the medium tyres do not last as long as the hard tyres. With any softer tyre compound, you just want to get as much speed as you can right in that first stint before they burn out too much. And he wasn't getting that chance because he was caught up in a lot of dirty air behind Charles Leclerc. And there was a bit of sarcasm and sass that came out of Lewis Hamilton because, look, he said, this doesn't feel like good teamwork, especially because I helped Charles out during the Chinese Grand Prix when I knew I didn't have the pace. I said, swap us, let him overtake me. And he did turn around and was like, just go and get a cup of tea while you're at it, because it was taking ages to make that decision because it wasn't a no and it wasn't a yes. They were just leaving him hanging. Eventually they did let him pass, but at that point there was only so much Lewis could do on those tyres because they'd been in dirty air for so long and because he had already done so many laps on them behind Charles. And then Charles was like, look, he's not catching up, I'm being stuck in dirty air, can we swap around again? That also took a good couple of laps before it happened. And then it did. Charles couldn't really catch up, but it was almost just giving Charles the place back, which I don't blame them for. But indecisive decisions both times. If you had swapped Lewis around earlier, probably could have caught up with Kimi Antonelli. And even if that didn't happen, you should have gotten them to switch around so Charles could take the lead again and have more of a chance. And neither of them managed to catch up with Kimi Antonelli, who wasn't lapping that quick either. They could have done it, but indecisiveness from Ferrari again, and the frustration and comments from Lewis, I don't blame him for. The way that Charles was looking and how unhappy he was in his post-race interviews, I don't blame him for. I really do not blame either of the drivers here. We are back to a place with Ferrari that, first of all, I don't think we ever left with them, but we are at a place again where there's so much indecisiveness. The car is not quick. It's slower than the Williams. They're in 4th place in the constructors right now. And when you add on to the fact that you're not helping any of your races by indecisive strategies, what are you guys expecting to happen here? It is frustrating to watch because these are 2 drivers that I love watching race anyway, but I can't imagine what it's like for Charles and Lewis, who are in those cars, who want the results for themselves and for the team, to not get decisions straight away. And for what? What is taking so long? What's the delay? Because this is really a Ferrari issue. Other teams do not struggle to the extent that Ferrari do when it comes to making a decision on Should we switch tyres? Should we pit? Should we swap the cars around? The fact that Lewis called his own strategy in the sprint because his engineer said it was too late to pit is insane. If he hadn't pitted, he would have stayed in P6, probably have lost places to cars behind him. But his strategy call meant that Ferrari could at least take P3 in the sprint. It's so frustrating to watch because this isn't just this year. This has been years and years and years in the making, and it never seems to change with them. I don't really know what to say here, and I think what makes it even more frustrating is that when Charles did his post-race interview and they'd asked him about that initial switch between him and Lewis where Lewis took the lead, Charles was like, well, they only asked me once, and when they asked, I was happy to swap. So they hadn't even asked Charles the first 2-3 times that Lewis was asking about it. So that swap could have been done so much quicker. Charles didn't have an issue with that. So frustrating. The drivers themselves seem okay with each other. I don't think they blame each other for any of what happened because, like I said, it's neither of their faults. The team need to become more decisive because this isn't working for them, whatever they're trying to do on the pit wall and with their strategy. Waiting 10-11 laps to have a conversation with each other is not working. F1 is a really fast-paced sport. I mean, it's kind of the name of the game here, so you have to make those decisions quickly, and Ferrari are failing at that right now. I'm also really curious with Lewis's race engineer Riccardo Adami whether or not he stays in that role now going forward. The communication between him and Lewis seems to be difficult at best. I don't think Lewis is getting all the information that he needs and that he wants, and sometimes he's getting too much information and it doesn't seem to be improving. And I know we're only 6 races into the season, but I am just curious whether Adami stays in that role for the foreseeable future or not, because I don't feel like it's gonna be the case in the long term at the very least. Like, potentially by summer if they find someone, if not, end of the year, because it's painful to hear those radios at this point. And I know there is frustration with Fred as well. I mean, first of all, he said there was nothing wrong with the strategy. We had to think and talk about it, but in my opinion, it shouldn't have taken that long. But I know a lot of fans are feeling the frustration with Fred Vasseur saying, you know what, yeah, like, there is pace in the car. We just need to unlock it. To the point that even Charles said in his post-race interview, there is nothing more to unlock. There is a problem here and we're not really sure how to fix it. So I think there is frustration with some people there. Fred Vasseur keeps saying, yeah, there's pace, we're just got to figure out how to unlock it, and it's really not there. Next race, I believe, is Emilia Romagna. It's one of Ferrari's home races. They go back to Italy, and if they have a performance like this, it will be even more painful to watch. So yeah, I can't lie, I finished watching the Miami Grand Prix feeling frustrated for both of the Ferrari drivers because there is only so much that they can do. The upside, one of the only upsides I think for Ferrari this weekend, bar that P3 sprint, is the fact that Lewis did say in his post-race interview, he is feeling more at one with the car, he is feeling more comfortable with it and feeling like he understands how to drive it a little bit more. And I think you could see, you know, yes, the lockups that knocked him out of Q2 happened, but there were points where their pace was really on par with each other and Lewis did look a lot more comfortable with the car. So that is a bonus. The problem is that, yes, okay, Lewis might be able to start extracting the most out of the car now like Charles, but when the most is landing you in P7, P8, that's not where Ferrari want to be. So we'll wait and see what happens with them. But not the only unhappy team, because Carlos Sainz really was not happy with Williams. Now, bear in mind, Carlos Sainz did have some damage from contact with Alex Albon during lap 1, but that wasn't what Carlos Sainz was unhappy about. Carlos had asked his race engineer for some help from Alex Albon, who he was ahead of in the race. His engineer said, yep, that's fine. They were basically going to freeze positions. He had told Carlos, yep, that has been communicated to Alex. And next thing we know, Alex Albon has overtaken Carlos Sainz. Carlos wasn't happy, told his engineer, look, I thought you said that you told Alex to stay behind me. And his engineer was like, yeah, we know, but now just stay in Alex's DRS. And he was really, really unhappy with that, and I can completely understand why. So team orders and strategy calls across Ferrari and Williams not being the best this weekend. Really, though, I think the biggest issue out of those two teams is Ferrari. Williams, okay, yes, there was a lot of miscommunication there, but with Ferrari, this is just a habit at this point for them. Let's have a chat about my winners and losers for this weekend's Grand Prix though, and my winners has to be McLaren and Oscar Piastri. Like I said, with McLaren utterly dominant this last weekend, there just seems to be no stopping them, and Oscar Piastri 3 wins in a row, still leading the Constructors' Championship. I'm also going to put Alex Albon in the winners. I think he did a very good job in P5, barring all the drama that happened with Carlos Sainz, but still drove a very good race. Losers, no one is going to be surprised that Ferrari are at the top of my list here. It's not a problem I think is going to be sorted out anytime soon because it's happened for so long and they don't seem to think it's an issue, so they are at the top of the list. Also on there are all 4 of the rookies that DNF'd, because just how unlucky is that, guys, to 4 rookies DNFing and 2 from engine issues is awful, just awful. And also on that list is Aston Martin, who had a very, very tough weekend and are once again walking away with no points. But that was the Miami Grand Prix. A lot going on, a lot to chat about, and a lot of drama. There is no race next week, but I am back with an episode because I have the very lovely Jenny Fletcher from Girls on Track on the podcast next weekend, where we chat about her journey into motorsport, how the motorsport landscape has changed from when she first started to now, and the advice that she would give young women and girls looking to get into motorsport. So please tune in for that episode. I absolutely loved having that chat with her and I can't wait to share that episode with you all. Thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you find me on Instagram and TikTok at Steward_office so you can find even more motorsport content from me. And I'll see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Steward's office.